You have one master password, and behind it is your email, your bank account, your work credentials, your cryptocurrency, health records, literally everything about your life is oftentimes handled inside of a password manager. But the real question is, which company do you want to trust with all of that? This is probably the most sensitive piece of software you're going to have in your tech stack. These are not all built the same. We can still tier these, and you all asked for it in our last VPN tier list. So let's dive into this. Kind of like the last one, don't take the scoring itself too seriously, which a lot of you still did. It's more to be educational, so I can tell you about each provider. So owners, open source, if it's audited, if it's zero knowledge, if there's a free tier, self-hosting, passkey support, interoperability, all these good things. The goal is to showcase the differences so that you guys know which one probably aligns better with you. Without further ado, let's get started. 1Password is quite fascinating, and it's a very polarizing password manager because a lot of people have learned to appreciate the legitimate security that it provides, but they don't like how it's not open source. With that said, they have extremely good audit history. Again, the security behind this is genuinely really solid. Not only is this zero knowledge, which means that, everything's encrypted and you control the encryption keys, they can access your passwords and your data, but they even have a secret key model, which means that your vault is encrypted with both your master password and a locally generated secret key. So even if their servers are breached, attackers would need both your master password and that secret key to decrypt everything. It's genuinely great architecture. But they literally just had a controversy where they raised prices and they've been doing these enterprise AI pivots. They're generally kind of always pushing the industry forward in terms of adopting the newest technologies in the space. And I think they were one of the first to adopt passkeys. They do a good job of exporting passwords in TOTP. And based on what I can find, though, they don't export passkeys yet. So overall, very solid, no breaches. They do have that price increase and they do have that enterprise AI pivot. It is such a polarizing company. I'm tempted to put B, but when I put it in B, it's like, well, they deserve more cred than B. But then if I put them higher, it's like, well, so I'm going to start with B right now. I'm going to see how this starts to pan out as we go on. We're going to move over to Apple passwords. This is also a very fascinating one because not so long ago, there was no such thing as Apple passwords. It was kind of iCloud Keychain, which people were using as a password manager, but it was this awkward thing that lived in your settings app. But Apple actually decided to commit to a real password manager, and they're continuing to make it better. In fact, in WWDC just a couple weeks ago, they showcased literally using agentic AI to find your weak passwords, and it will automatically update them for you, which is not a feature I've ever seen before in my life. It sounds scary. I want to see how it works. I'm very curious, but it's a bit of a scary concept to say the least. Their keychain implementation is proprietary. There's nothing open source about this. Now, zero knowledge is functionally very much yes. It's using keychains still. It's end-to-end encrypted. Your drive secrets are stored with you and your keychain secret. Now, while there is end-to-end encryption, it is worth mentioning that it is still tied into Apple's ecosystem, which is by far the biggest pro and con of using Apple passwords, which is going to make it very tough for me to score. Now, again, it's free. I think technically it's tied to your iCloud storage, but the free plan should cover your passwords and your password manager. There is no self-hosting. You have to have Apple and be in the Apple ecosystem. And they do support passkeys. They've actually been some of the leaders in terms of passkey support. And they've even added some ways to share passkeys with family members, which I find quite fascinating. There's no issues with it. It's really hard for me to come forward and say these are the issues with Apple passwords. But really, the one thing I can point to is that there is no good reason to use it. It's designed by Apple to be in the Apple ecosystem. It's going to be hard to move away from it if anything bad does happen to it. And that's something I'm always thinking about when I'm picking the software I use. If something bad happens to the software and I no longer trust it, am I easily able to switch to something else? And with Apple passwords, as of right now, that is not the case. I don't think there's an easy way to export TOTP codes, which is those 2FA codes, the 6-digit codes. I don't think there's a way to export passkeys right now. And a lot of the ways that Apple incentivizes you to use things like the family sharing and stuff is also going to lock you in from being able to leave it someday. So just generally speaking, I'm always going to push people towards a dedicated password manager. That's not even getting into the fact that this is probably going to work better with Safari and Apple's tools over other tools. And then good luck trying to get this to work well across Linux. So many downstream impacts of choosing Apple for your password manager that I would flag before you decide to use this. But on the bright side, it is a pretty good default password manager that is better than some of the others that we'll talk about today. Bitwarden! We recently interviewed someone from the Bitwarden team on Techlore Talks. Tori will leave a card for that. Bitwarden is a community favorite. A lot of you guys love Bitwarden. They are open source. You can self-host it. It's definitely, so far, of the ones we've covered the most, the one that I think aligns most with the overall values of myself and by extension, you all probably, mostly. They do independent audits. They are zero knowledge, and they use Argon 2 and newer versions that you can opt into using as well, which just means it's a stronger version of encryption. Their free plan is also one of the most generous in the industry, which is great because it has native syncing and it gives you majority of features you need to get started with basic password management for good security online. If you do pay premium, which is still very well priced, you get access to things like TOTP, you get emergency access, vault health reports, priority support, and all those things. So they still have passkey support, autofill across platforms. It's very open to pretty much any operating system you can imagine. It's hard not to put Bitwarden in S tier. They're also interoperable, so it's easy to export and import from and out of it. The really underrated thing about tools like Bitwarden is that even if Bitwarden, the company, disappears tomorrow or does something crazy, they're still open source, and you still have things like Vault Warden, so you can take your Bitwarden vault and literally move it to your own server, which is super powerful. This is genuinely kind of a gold standard for open source cloud-based password managers, and I think it needs to go in S tier. All right, Dashlane. This is kind of somewhat bad timing for them because they just had kind of a LastPass style scare. Not to tease later in the video LastPass, but Dashlane is a private US-based company. They are kind of apparently open source. I had to look this up, but they made a couple of their clients open source, but for all intents and purposes, they are not open source. They are audited. They are zero knowledge. They actually had a recent security incident where they had a data breach that could have looked like LastPasses from a few years ago, which we will extensively touch on later, but they had a pretty weak response out the gate, but overall, they actually had pretty good mitigations in place, and they kept the damage very well under control. And overall, their final response, I'd say, was actually much better than their initial response. And so while that was a scary incident that shouldn't have happened in the first place, I think that could have been a much worse situation for them. There is no self-hosting, and they were one of the first people to introduce passkeys as well. They do allow easy exports for your passwords. I was finding mixed information on how easy it is to export TOTP codes, those 2FA codes. It doesn't seem as clear cut as some of the other options on this list. So I'm struggling to find a reason. See, I have reasons to say Dashlane is better than Apple passwords just strictly from the fact that they're probably going to be easier to use if you don't just use Apple for everything. I think that's an important note. But yeah, this is a tough one. But I think 1Password is a better password manager than Dashlane. So for now, I'm going to bump 1Password up 1, move Dashlane at B, and keep Apple at C. All right, the next password manager is NPass. And this one I have a little bit less experience with. And so if you use NPass and you're like, man, this guy doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, let me know in the description. NPass is quite fascinating because it reminds me of another offline password manager that we'll talk about later, but it's not open source. So it sits in this weird kind of place for me. It is audited. They seem to be doing a really good job. They do use open source cryptography for the vault itself, which I hope everybody here is doing. But the vault is by default a local encrypted file, which means that you're going to take your password manager vault and you have to find a place to sync it. You can sync it via iCloud. You can sync it via Google Drive, Dropbox, Nextcloud, your own NAS, whatever you want to do. The point is, this is practically an encrypted file that you got to sync yourself. There is a free tier. This is one of those weird services where you can self-host despite it being proprietary, but passkey support, as far as I can find, is a little bit weaker on this one. They do allow good exports of all of your data, and there is no major controversy, but I think what I'm stuck with is we're going to talk about KeePass very soon here. I don't know why I would recommend NPass over KeePass personally, but it seems to be genuinely a good provider. I'm going to put it in B right now. It is closed source, which for me is kind of a big L. I think the overall security model is better than something like Dashlane. Okay, we now have the one I was most excited to cover, Google Password Manager. Now, I had to actually do research on this because I have so little knowledge on Google's password manager. And the more I learned about this and researched how it worked, the more I was blown away that one of the richest companies in the world could do such a embarrassingly bad job with their password manager. You might be going, Henry, it is just obvious that all of these password managers either use basic zero knowledge encryption so they can't access your passwords, or they're just offline and make you sync them yourselves. And you'd be wrong. By default, Google can read your passwords. I know. I had to look this up on so many different websites just to be like, am I being crazy right now? But no, passwords are stored on Google's servers encrypted with your Google account credentials, right? They're going to do encryption at rest. They're going to do all that stuff, but Google can still access them theoretically. You have to use and opt in to using use your own sync passphrase to get true end-to-end encryption. How many people are doing this? Probably almost nobody. And Google has kind of shown that this is their way of doing things. When you look at things like Google Authenticator, their 2FA app, same thing. They rolled out Cloud Sync support and they rolled it out without end-to-end encryption. They loosely committed back then that they would add it. And honestly, I don't know if they ever did it because they never made a big deal out of it. And most likely no one's going to opt into using it. Defaults really matter. And Google choosing not to use basic security for a password manager is a weird choice for them to make. Now, on the bright side, there is good passkey support. Google aggressively pushes passkeys within this. This is also going to be locked into using Google's services, kind of like Apple. So you are picking between two ecosystems here. There is no way I can give this anything more than a D. I can almost always find a justification for a tool, even the ones that seem the most egregious. I cannot find a single use case where anybody ever should use Google's password manager. Avoid this at all costs in 2026 at the time I'm making this video. All right, KeePass. For those who don't know what KeePass is just very different from any other piece of software. This is like a movement. This is a lifestyle. This is what you do when you just don't trust anyone in the world. But it's not really about that. It's about having good security. It's about having good privacy. It's about having a good open standard. KeePass is, I think the best way to put it is a docx file. When you think of a docx file, you kind of associate it with Microsoft, but ultimately everything handles docx files, right? Like Apple Pages even handles a docx file. It's also like a PDF file. You associate that with Adobe, but like every browser opens PDF files. There's other PDF editors. There's other PDF viewers. And that's kind of KeePass. I like to look at KeePass as more of this type of file that is a password manager. It's like an encrypted vault. It's a KDBX file. And you can just download tons of different KeePass clients, which allow you to access it, edit it, manage it. And so this is the equivalent of, okay, you're choosing to use KeePass, the overall format, and that's going to hold all of your passwords in your own file that you control locally on your machine. And then you need to pretty much just download a client that opens that file. And there's countless open source clients out there on every other major operating system. And then it's kind of your job to just sync that file between them. So a lot of people will store their KDBX file on even Google Drive or iCloud, just basic cloud providers. And then they point each of their clients at that, and then boom, they can sync their passwords on their own. It's all open source. It's offline by default. And it's probably the most secure option on this list when you really break it down. And it also gives you the most flexibility. It's by far the most interoperable. The only downside to KeePass in my head, and I do warn people about this, this is a real limitation. You know, KeePass people really like KeePass, but it is a little more inconvenient to get set up for most people. A lot of people who don't use a password manager yet are already intimidated by the concept. And also you have to pick a client. Each client has different features that it supports. You then have to figure out how to sync it yourself. And on this operating system, a lot of the clients are paid, but it's a one-time payment, but some of them are subscriptions. That is complicated to manage. And so I think there's a little bit more complexity, but if you're willing to go down that route, you are going to get probably the best password manager experience. It is S tier. It's just a little bit higher friction point than some of these other options. But I think that if you have a higher threat model and or you just want the most control, there won't be a better option on this list. Keeper, I think, is going to be one of the tougher ones for me to share any kind of real opinion on them because there isn't like much I can say. So they aren't open source. They are a private US-based company. They do audits. They are zero knowledge. It's well documented. Overall, no problems. There are self-hosting options for enterprise, but consumer products is only cloud hosted. So you are probably going to be doing cloud hosting through them. They do support passkeys, and I was finding mixed information on exporting 2FA, which could be a big drawback. The real problem, and the only thing I can flag as kind of a controversy, is that Keeper actually threatened legal action against a journalist who reported a security vulnerability in their browser extension, but that allowed credential theft from any website. And that whole response by them to sue the reporter for literally covering an actual problem in their browser extension has been remembered ever since by the security community. So while they haven't had any like data breaches or any critical problems, I don't know why I would ever say right now in this video, this is who Keeper is for. I don't think you're going to be wrong using Keeper. I just don't really fully understand who they're targeting. And to me, it feels a little bit more enterprise focused than consumer focused. For context, literally when you go on their site, you're going to see things that are very much, to me, like they're talking about certifications, compliance, enterprise leader. To me, these are all buzzwords targeting organizations. So I think for most of you out there, unless you have a good reason to use Keeper, I think this is more geared towards businesses than for individuals. Those are my thoughts on it. If you use Keeper, I'd love to hear your thoughts. All right, LastPass, another controversial option. So LastPass is very hard to cover. Even the security community is a bit polarized on LastPass. Most people acknowledge that their data breach from a few years ago was bad, but they are now saying, well, they handle it well and they've made a lot of changes to make it better. But my opinion is, why? Trust them, maybe in a few years from now and they still don't have anything going, then sure, we can, but like there's so many good options. So they do claim zero knowledge architecture, but that 2022 breach really exposed some flaws in what we consider zero knowledge. They had unencrypted metadata like URLs stored alongside encrypted vaults, and they weren't very clear on what was actually being encrypted. They also used low iteration counts for their password manager vaults, and that allowed people to break into it. Millions have been drained from cryptocurrency accounts tied to that 2022 data breach. They also did some kind of shady stuff with their free tier by restricting it to one device type. So you can either use LastPass for free on mobile or desktop, but not both. Their passkey support even is a bit limited. I've tried their UI UX, and to me, I just didn't get it. I didn't think it was better of a user experience than the others on this list. Also, one of my largest gripes, this really pisses me off, so I'm sorry in advance, but they have this major lock-in system with 2FA codes. So if you scan your 6-digit 2FA codes into your LastPass account, they literally explicitly say they do not support exporting it. This is their own documentation. They have no official way of getting it out of there. And for me, that is a clear indication that they do not give a damn about letting their users actually control their data. This is the same thing with LastPass Authenticator. There is no kind of official bulk export of your 2FA codes, which means if you have 30 accounts that have those 2FA codes set up, you have to go to each one of those accounts, turn off 2FA and re-enable 2FA using your new provider that allows you to migrate and do whatever you want just to move away from LastPass. Shame on them. They also had a breach in 2015 that people don't really know about. That was kind of overshadowed by 2022. Honestly, it's a D tier. I can't. I mean, it is better than Google's password manager. Everything is. I don't think Google's password manager is better than like a locked password set Apple Notes document. Like, honestly, it is not good. But LastPass isn't great either. All right, this is one of the toughest ones, I think, to rank here. This is NordPass from, yes, the same people as NordVPN. And we've already talked about in the VPN tier list how I think the biggest issue with Nord is just how in your face they are about everything. The marketing is so intense. It's like the Athletic Greens of like the security space, right? The tough thing though is that they actually aren't the worst, right? And that's okay. Like, it doesn't need to be the best. It doesn't need to be the worst. And I think that kind of goes for a lot of these companies that put a ton of marketing behind the brand. Same thing with Athletic Greens. Like, they aren't actually the worst product. They're not the best product, but my God, the marketing is intense. They are independently audited. All data is encrypted on device before it's uploaded. It is a newer algorithm choice. They use XChaCha 20. There is a free plan available, but it's limited to one active session. So I think it's pretty unrealistic for most people. There is no self-hosting. They do support passkeys, and they don't clearly document exporting TOTP seeds. So I don't know if I just wasn't able to find that information, but it's unclear if it's easy to export those 2FA codes. With that said, there is literally no controversy behind this specific product. And I've actually had people leave comments. Some of you left comments in our videos where I kind of dismissed NordPass as an option, but some of you went in and said it is the most usable password manager ever, and I am not tech savvy, and it's the only one that actually made it so I was comfortable using a password manager. I think that probably is the person NordPass is for. And so if that's you, I think the two options so far are going to be something like NordPass. I'm going to put it in C tier. Yeah, I think C tier is fair. But I think these two here, Apple Passwords and NordPass, are the most like, if you are intimidated as hell by all of these tools and you want the easiest possible thing to use, I think those are the two options for you. and they're probably not going to harm you long term either. And you're probably still going to gain some security, especially if you're reusing passwords and you're not currently using strong passwords yet. All right, now we have Proton Pass. So this is a newer, I guess relatively newer. They're not new, but out of all these providers, Proton Pass is one of the newest, if not the newest on this list. When this first came out, I was kind of wondering why. Like, we already have good password managers, but the more it's developed, the more it's really grown on me. So it's completely open source. It's been audited. It is zero knowledge. They also use Argon too. They're using pretty solid practices, maybe slightly outdone by someone like 1Password's model. That's probably the only thing that might beat it. The free tier is also one of the strongest out of all of these. It's unlimited logins, unlimited devices. It has autofill, basic 2FA, and it has integrated email aliases, which I think is the most powerful thing. I think Bitwarden has it as well, that you have to link it to either ADIO or simple login. Last I checked, 1Password, I believe, has something similar as well. But the free plan is pretty solid for Proton Pass. And of course, it's integrated in the Proton ecosystem. So it's kind of this thing where if you like that ecosystem, then you're going to enjoy it. And if you don't want all your eggs in one basket, then a lot of people actually use the Proton ecosystem, but use a separate password manager away from the Proton ecosystem. So it's kind of a preference there on what you want to do. There is no self-hosting option, which is a downside compared to something like Bitwarden. But overall, there's not much to complain about. The security practices are strong, the privacy practices are strong, and the usability is actually, I'd say, the closest to being like one of the most usable password managers for the average person. If you're someone, again, who's a bit intimidated by password managers as a concept, I think of all of the top password managers out there, this is, in my view, again, this is very preference based, but like, I don't love Bitwarden's UI UX. I don't love 1Password's or KeePass's, but Proton Pass is the one that resonated best with me. It's actually my main password manager. So I'm going to put it in S tier. I love the feature set. I love the compatibility. They've been kind of killing it. We also do have an opt-in Proton affiliate link in a description. It doesn't change how it would perform in the tier list. It's just a way for you guys to support us if it resonates with you and you want to give back. So check that out. All right, RoboForm is another one I have a little bit less experience with. So it is not open source. It is a privately held company called Cyber Systems. It's actually one of the oldest on this list. They were founded in 1999, that parent company. They do overall fine stuff. They're audited. They should be overall zero knowledge. They're free tier covers one device, but they don't do self-hosting. They do have passkey support, and it's a bit unclear if you can export your 2FA codes. I couldn't find that very cleanly in their documentation. They've been around for literally over 20 years, and they haven't had any kind of publicly documented major breach or anything wrong with them. Very clean track record, very low profile, nothing really wrong with it. I'm going to put it kind of in B tier, but the lack of like a clean export, yeah, I'd say it's like high C, low B. I'm going to keep it in B for now just because it's impressive. They've been around for so long. And now I have the last one, which is a bit hard. You know, these tier lists are inherently simplistic, and I know it's hard to like somehow group a service into one place for it, right? And Passbolt falls into that because they cater to quite different clients, because they seem to me to be very enterprise focused, but they also want the community edition to be well known and well used. And the community edition, you know, can be used by businesses, but also individuals. So overall, the concept behind Passbolt is that it's completely open source. It's been third-party audited. It's zero knowledge. You can self-host the community edition for free. And they're kind of like Nextcloud, where you can also go for the enterprise edition, but there's not a huge number of differences, especially for you and you're not an enterprise person. You're not going to notice anything drastically different. They do have great interoperability, especially between things like KeePass. You can export things like your 2FA codes. So I've interviewed the Passbolt team if you want to learn more about them, but to me, this is a very easy A tier. I don't think it's the first thing I would ever recommend to somebody right now. I think it's meant more for a techie audience in its current state, but it's very clearly a great service and there's nothing wrong with it. And they're implementing some really great practices. And I think especially for enterprise, if you're like an open source first enterprise, I think that's going to be the top option in the top 5 here for you, especially for the value. All right, so let's go through this. I do think, all things considered, I prefer Proton Pass over Bitwarden. I think it's a more usable experience, but I think they're both great. It's hard not to keep KeePass at the top. I think there's no really beating that openness and transparency of something like KeePass. I do agree. I think all three of these are S tier. I do think 1Password, if it was open source and they were a little bit more transparent about things, I would move it also to S tier, but I just don't think it's quite there for me. But I do think for the regular person, which is most of you listening, it's a better option than Passbolt as of right now. But that can go either way. If you care more about transparency, then maybe Passbolt's better for you. Given Dashlane just had their little incident not that long ago, I'm going to move it to the bottom of B tier. RoboForm and NPass for me are kind of, it can go either way. Now, this is where things get tough. I do think, if someone sat in front of me right now and they said, Henry, I am only going to use NordPass or Apple passwords. Which one am I going to use? I think I'd have to push them towards Nord just because of the fact I think it's going to work better for them long term. Like, if they ever decide not to buy an Apple device, if they want to use different browsers and they don't like the passwords extension from Apple, I think NordPass is just going to be a bit more usable for them and they're going to value the user experience across any browser, any operating system, any device. So that's why I'd push them that direction. But it would be tempting to still say Apple passwords because it's free. So I would also bring up the budget aspect of things as well. I think Keeper belongs there, and I do think I would say to use LastPass before Google. So that is my locked in tier list. I think the main question to ask yourself first is, do you want something that is offline first or online first? And that's a very easy question to answer. Do you want to just pick up a device and have everything automatically sync for you easy out of the box? Or do you want something that is by default not going to contact any servers and puts you in ultimate control? If you're leaning towards the latter, KeePass is your choice. Like, that is an obvious option that you should go for. If you're not that and you're going, well, I want convenience and I want a good balance between security and usability, then you're going to start looking at things like 1Password, ProtonPass, and Bitwarden. And honestly, all three of them should have pretty good free trials or good ways to start, or even if it's just paying for the first month, try them out. They all have good exports and imports. So I recommend that you try those three and see which ones align best with you. I think those are probably the best starting points for a majority of people. And then I already covered kind of the use cases for the other ones, except the Google one, which all of you should avoid. Last thing I'd push you all to think about before you commit to one of these is, how hard is it to leave? I've migrated at this point between 3 different password managers in the last 10 years. And luckily, all the ones I used allowed me to move to the next one without having to think about it very much. So that's something to consider when you're looking at this whole chart and when you're picking a password manager. If you want to learn more about password managers, we have a whole wiki article about it. So if you want to learn more about how these work, if they're secure, how to use them in the most secure ways, the wiki is where I'd push you to. We also have our tools page, which has all the ones that I recommend to you, as well as all the other tools that we recommend to improve your privacy and security online. And if you're going again with ProtonPass, there's an opt-in affiliate link in a description. It's a way to support the channel if you like this kind of stuff. Otherwise, the tier list itself is in a description, so you can do it yourself. Until next time, thanks for watching.